As India tries to explore more commercial opportunities with Iran, we ask how vigorously India is willing to join in international efforts to prevent Iran's emergence as a nuclear power, and how would India be able to balance its growing partnership with the US and Israel? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. Iran is India's second largest fuel supplier after Saudi Arabia, providing around 12% of the country's crude needs. But the US and Israel are trying to gather support for full economic sanctions against Iran by the end of June. As Tehran and New Delhi plan to hit $25 billion in annual bilateral trade within the next 4 years, it appears that India is resisting the pressure. Al Jazeera's Prerna Suri reports.
This is how India is planning to pay Iran for its oil. Rice and grains from across the country come to this market in New Delhi. From here, they'll be shipped to other Indian ports to be finally sold in Iran. It's a novel way to bypass recent economic sanctions imposed by the United States and the European Union on Tehran. India and Iran have come up with a unique barter trade agreement. Under that, Iranian oil will be paid in the Indian rupee. It's a currency that isn't freely tradable. So the way the Iranians are going to dispose of their rupees is by buying goods like this, making it an extremely lucrative arrangement for the Indians. India buys over $12 billion worth of Iranian crude oil every year. It's Tehran's second largest oil customer after China. But Indian exporters say with this new payment arrangement, there's a potential to increase non-oil trade to as much as $14 billion a year.
It's going to be a win-win situation for both of us. And Iran is an important country, and there are a lot of opportunities for us. So I don't see any reason why we should not go ahead.
And while it makes good business sense for India to explore new opportunities, it's also straining ties with its allies. Israel is a key weapons supplier to India, while the United States has been clearing the path for New Delhi to gain access to privileged nuclear technologies, especially since the two countries signed a civilian nuclear deal in 2008. And the pressure is now increasing on India to act. US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, testifying at a congressional meeting last month, said the United States is having, quote, very intense and very blunt, unquote, conversations with India, China and Turkey on reducing their dependence on Iranian oil. In exchange, the Americans are offering oil from Saudi Arabia as a substitute. But India is resisting. Over 400 million Indians get their energy needs through crude oil imported from Iran. And in a strongly worded statement last week, the Indian embassy in Washington reflected this dependence, saying,
an automatic replacement of all Iranian oil imports is not a simple matter of selection or a realistic option.
A sentiment which resonates back home.
We are not going to take sides. Taking sides for us is not an option. And also this idea that you are with us or against us is really not acceptable, and it is something we must resist and in fact reject.
India also says that unless these economic sanctions are backed by a United Nations Security Council vote, it can't be forced upon by other nations. As a diplomatic standoff continues to brew between the United States, Israel and India, for now it's these businessmen who are benefiting. Prerna Suri for Inside Story, New Delhi.
So why does India continue to trade with Iran despite the mounting international pressure? To answer the question, we're joined by our guests today from New Delhi, Sreeram Chaulia, who's Vice Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs. He's also published author of International Organizations and Civilian Protection, Power, Ideas and Humanitarian Aid in Conflict Zones. From Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz, Senior Fellow and Director for the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. He's also authored and edited several books, including National Security Case Studies. And from Beirut, Mohammad Marandi, political analyst and professor of American Studies at the University of Tehran, currently a visiting professor at the American University of Beirut. Gentlemen, welcome. Sreeram Chaulia, we'll start with you. What is the true extent of India's relations with Tehran? Should we call it, an alliance, a strategic partnership?
I think it would be fair to say that it is a cooperation based on mutual benefit. India imports 12% of its oil from Iran, which is irreplaceable despite Western efforts to show that there is a substitute. And then secondly, India and Iran are nearly neighbors. They're only separated by Pakistan. So energy security and geostrategy are the two reasons that make them mutually beneficial relations. And I think alliance is too far-fetched because India considers itself neutral on a number of these questions, including the tussle between Israel and Iran and between the Cold War that's been on between the West and Iran for quite a while, and even on the Palestinian question. So I think the Middle East, India views it primarily from a very pragmatic sense rather than an ideologically charged sense, which you often see from that region. The Middle East is somewhat far away, but the Persian Gulf is closer. And so I think it's mostly, it's almost a near neighbor. So geostrategy, the problem in Afghanistan, and then energy security, this is what really defines this mutually beneficial relationship. Iran needs hard cash at a time when there is the sanctions noose is tightening. And India is willing to continue trading with Iran on that front. And therefore, and in the long run, at least in the medium to long run, India should think about diversifying its oil supplier base. But as of now, I think it's a mutually beneficial relationship and it stands this way. And come what may, no matter what the pressure is from Western powers, I think India is determined to stay this course, which is to continue to deal with Iran as a near neighbor.
Mohammad Marandi, how important to Tehran then, in the light of international sanctions, is its relationship with New Delhi?
Well, India is becoming increasingly important for Iran and also for the world. It's a rapidly growing economy, and it is a major power that lies outside the Western bloc. Western countries like to consider themselves as representing the international community, but in reality they are a small minority. And as countries like India, like Brazil, like Russia, China, South Africa and others rise, the influence of Western countries decrease, and these countries will play not only a more important economic role, but a political role. India's relationship with India is important both with regards to trade and also with regards to the situation in Afghanistan. Both countries are concerned about extremism, and in fact, one of the reasons why India would prefer to continue importing oil from Iran and having a strong relationship is because that Iran does not export the sort of extremist ideology that countries like Saudi Arabia do, and which are a threat to internal security in the country.
So, Mohammed, you don't believe that India is only looking at Iran as a supplier of oil in the short term?
No, I think that both Iran and India recognize that the world is moving away from the West and that Asia is becoming much more important. Within the next decade, India, Brazil, Russia, China will be 4 of the 6 most powerful economies in the world. And they will be replacing countries like the United Kingdom, and France and Germany. So the world is changing dramatically, and India and Iran have had historic ties, the subcontinent in general, with Iran for hundreds of years. And I think this is in fact increasing. Right now you see huge numbers of Iranians actually now going to India to study at university, whereas in the past Iranians used to go to Europe.
Richard Weitz, does the West, the US in particular, have real cause for concern about the nature of New Delhi's relationship with Tehran?
Well, it is a concern, but I would reaffirm what especially the first speaker, but also our Iranian guest said, that there are a lot of reasons why Iran and particularly India want to cooperate with each other. There's the energy connection, there's the geopolitical connection, some ideological connection. A lot of countries, such as China's in the same way, they prefer to maintain good ties with both. I'm not sure if India wants to move away from the West. If anything, it's trying to move closer to the West, particularly the United States and Europe. That said, the main concern is that the United States has several options how to deal with Iran's nuclear program. One is military attack, which nobody wants to do. Two is do nothing, which is considered risky. And three is what everyone's trying to do is the sanctions means to coerce Iran into making some kind of compromise that makes everybody comfortable. And the United States had good success with some countries. Europe, some of the Asian countries like Japan and Korea are now supporting it. But India and China are the particular concerns. What you're seeing is as the European and Asian countries leave Iran, Indian and especially Chinese companies are backfilling, so it's sort of undermining the effect of the sanctions somewhat. I mean, it's complicating relations. I mean, Iran and India have had to resort to all sorts of contrived ways to keep their trade going, but Washington would prefer if India would refrain from engaging in economic deals with Iran until Iran changes its policy towards nuclear development.
So, Richard, what sort of blunt conversations, as Secretary of State Hillary Clinton put it, would Washington be having with New Delhi?
Well, they wouldn't be that blunt because people there understand the problem that India is in. I mean, Secretary Clinton said openly in congressional testimony that they've been trying to give pressure India somewhat, but really what they need to do and they're trying to do is organize an alternative. So they're trying to get Saudi Arabia or other countries to step in and field the supply. They're promoting nuclear cooperation in India in part in order to give it alternative sources of energy. We have the same problem with Pakistan. There are several countries there that until we can find a good alternative source of energy for them, they're naturally going to be drawn towards Iranian oil.
Sreeram Chaulia, I'm just wondering whether it's important for New Delhi to feel that it has to cultivate good relations with a Muslim nation to act as a counterweight to Pakistan, and if so, surely Saudi Arabia, which of course also has oil, would be a better partner in that respect.
Well, on the Pakistan front, our Iranian friend on the show just mentioned that Iran does not export Islamic terror into India, and that is a fact because the Islamic extremism that's come into India has rather come from Sunni forces, Sunni jihadi forces, rather than Shia ones. And therefore, there is a commonality there. But we should not overemphasize this because Pakistan shares a long border with Iran. And despite the persecution of Shias inside Pakistan and regular attacks on them, Iran and Pakistan have to live with the fact that they share a common border. And I don't think it's an outflanking maneuver that India can do whereby it can weaken Pakistan geopolitically by aligning with Iran. I don't think Iran is willing to go that far. But I have written in the past, for example, how Sunni jihadi forces like Jandallah have been acting covertly inside Iran with Pakistani collusion, and how India has been building all these roads in Afghanistan connecting Iran with Western Afghanistan. So there is some confluence there. As far as Saudi Arabia goes, again, it's quite interesting. It's very pragmatic. New Delhi, recently there have been high-level visits from India to Riyadh, where again this discussion was, I believe, made about expanding Saudi Arabian oil supplies. But the fact is, if you look at the oil market and the supply line, substitutes, the problem is that the volume that India imports, the amount of energy it is guzzling, growing at 7 to 8% a year, cannot be done through quick alternatives. And in the long run, and in the medium to long run, it makes sense for India to diversify away from this whole region, forget Saudi Arabia, and rather to look at Africa and Latin America, where new oil has been struck and new gas supplies are opening up. With the cost of shipping down, I think in the long run, we'll have to diversify away from the Middle East because it is a cauldron, and because of this overhanging Damocles' sword of war on Iran. Think about it. I mean, if we don't participate in the sanctions now, fine. Iran still, as our American colleague on the show just mentioned, Iran still has China and India which are buying. But the point is, if there is war, supply disruption is guaranteed, and we cannot rule out war. So in this situation, I think it makes sense for India in the long run not to abandon Iran right now because of the commonality of interests that everyone on the show agrees, but to rather think about alternatives away from this, the extreme volatility of the Middle East is not conducive for energy security. And India is not a great power like the United States or China to be able to use and marshal a lot of economic and military means to be able to lock in its energy supplies. India has to be more nimble-footed and will have to be more flexible in the future. But as of now, I think this delegation which has just gone from the Indian Exporters Association, for example, clearly shows that they are thinking about making beneficial exchanges, especially through trade.
Okay.
So because Iranians are paying in oil for rupees, the Indians have now a sum of money with which they should be able to export in rupees to Iran. So that is the whole context of this ongoing engagement. But in the medium to long run, I think like South Korea, like Japan, India will have to rethink. It's not because of pressure, it's because of pragmatic reasons.
Okay, but Mohammad Marandi, okay, so we have this trade delegation from India in Tehran. It's clear that India still wants to do business with Tehran, but with a number of important energy deals and projects effectively going back over a number of years, effectively frozen now due to what? Red tape, Iran wanting to impose last-minute changes on the deals. Just how reliable a trading partner is Iran as energy looks for energy, as India rather looks for energy security in particular?
Well, I think that Iran has always been a good partner despite the sanctions imposed by Western governments on Iran. The Iranian oil and gas industry continues to develop, and Iran continues to increase, for example, its gas production at a pretty rapid pace. In fact, one of the projects, one of the ideas that Iran has put forward is exporting natural gas through Pakistan to India to bring both Pakistan and India closer to each other, and also it would have benefits for all three countries. This is, of course, something that the United States opposes because of its antagonism towards Iran. I don't think that there is really an alternative to Iran, because if Western countries foolishly or the Israeli regime foolishly initiate a war, there will be no oil from any part of the Middle East and perhaps even Central Asia. And it's not just the Strait of Hormuz, it's the whole Persian Gulf region, and it would be uproar, and regimes like Saudi Arabia and others would become very unstable. So that's a very different scenario. But in general, I think that it's ironic that by pushing Iran away from themselves and by trying to hurt ordinary Iranians, the West does itself a disservice on two fronts. One, ordinary Iranians become more angry with the West because they recognize that Western governments are trying to hurt ordinary Iranians. And the second is that the Iranians are moving towards new partners. And so they're ditching the dollar and the euro. They're now trading in local currencies with countries like India and China, as well as Russia and a number of other countries. And therefore, their reliance on Western currencies is decreasing. And this is an incentive for greater trade with these countries. So ironically, Iranian ties with these countries become more important, and therefore the mutual relationship becomes even more important. And especially since Western countries really have never provided any evidence about Iran's nuclear program. They claim that it has a military aspect to it, but there has never been any evidence, despite the fact that the current head of the organization was handpicked by the United States and is firmly in the US camp, and the board of directors is close is largely Western countries, composed of Western countries, but there is no evidence. So all this, along with the other elements, make the future for Iranian relations with these countries more significant.
Right. You mentioned Mohammed, Israel. Richard Weitz, there's been a steady strengthening in the relationship between India and Israel, which is now a significant arms and technology supplier to New Delhi. How can India be friends to both Iran and Israel at the same time? Is it that there are no permanent friends or enemies in geopolitics, only permanent interests?
Well, I mean, India would presumably want to have good relations with all these countries, and as you point out, I mean, it's difficult because if these countries are antagonists with each other, India is being asked to choose, but I certainly would think it was trying to avoid choosing. It's not alone in this problem. I mean, China's got this problem. The countries in the South Caucasus have this problem. What they try and do is they try and maintain some ties with Iran so it doesn't involve into an antagonistic relationship. Some of them want to get oil from Iran. They also want to cultivate good relations with Israel, because you mentioned Israel has good defense strengths, good technology. The United States, the same. And they're trying to straddle as best they can. It's just becoming more difficult, particularly because the U.S. is pursuing the sanctions route, because it has the effect of any country that deals extensively with Iran, their companies, their banks, et cetera, then find it difficult to deal with Western banks. And so that's almost forcing them to choose. That's why there's some hope the sanctions will have some effect. But I mean, I don't consider it unnatural or even a negative that India wants to try and maintain good relations with all these countries. I think it's natural. I mean, ideally, the United States would like to have good relations with Iran for all sorts of reasons. I mean, geopolitically, there shouldn't be any reason for the antagonism between Iran and the United States. Looking at it from terms of the shared interests we would obtain in energy and regional politics and so on. But for reasons of history, Iran's nuclear program, et cetera, we're sort of stuck in this antagonism we can't seem to break. So, I mean, as I said, the bottom line here is that we're going to try and push India to choose, but we understand why India doesn't want to choose.
Okay. To what extent is the Israeli lobby in Washington, D.C. driving the U.S. pressure on India to steer away from Iran?
It is. Their pressure does exist. It's not a dominant factor. I mean, the concern is a bit more so far been on China more than India, because China has, for all sorts of reasons, has a much greater capability to help Iran resolve its problems. But again, people realize that this could easily become very counterproductive. And we saw this with the nuclear deal we were working with India. If we start pressing New Delhi too hard, it's going to backfire. So people are trying to be cautious about this.
Yeah. Sreeram, we're almost out of time here. I just want to pick up on something that I think it was Mohammed alluded to here, and that's the relationship. One area of commonality between New Delhi and Tehran is perhaps Afghanistan.
Oh yes, absolutely. It's critical. You know, all of us in this region have our eyes trained on the withdrawal deadline of 2014, and with the U.S. elections looming and all these persistent crises against the U.S. presence in Afghanistan, I think we will see a withdrawal sooner rather than later. So, in this kind of situation, at least a drawdown, not a withdrawal. In this kind of situation, it's critical. Iran, Russia, China, India, Pakistan, these are the key players that can stabilize the country. And this is where, leaving out Iran in the doghouse is not going to help. Even if you look back at 2001, Iran was essential for the overthrow of the Taliban.
Mohammed, would you concur with that?
Yes, I think that the U.S. withdrawal will make, in fact, India and Iran grow closer in countering extremism in that country. India is very vulnerable to these extremist forces, and Iran wants a stable Afghanistan. Hopefully, the Indians, the Pakistanis, the Iranians, and the Russians can help resolve the situation in the country. But I think this is itself another reason why the future of Indian and Iranian relations will continue to grow more important.
Okay, a 30-second answer, Richard, from you before we have to finish. Does India perhaps have a role as an intermediary between Iran and the US, the West?
I wish them luck if they want to try that. Those countries have tried that in the past. Brazil and Turkey have found themselves burned by both sides. But it's possible. I mean, India certainly is a great power and has great diplomats, so maybe they can pull off what all of us would like to see.
Gentlemen, there I'm afraid we must leave it for this edition of Inside Story. Thank you very much indeed to all our guests today, Sreeram Chaulia, Richard Weitz and Mohammad Marandi. And thank you very much indeed for being with us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, if you want to send us any feedback, any comments that you'd like to make about anything that we've discussed on the programme, all you have to do is email us your thoughts. Our address, insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finnegan. I'll see you again. Bye for now.